Theaters are, of course, entirely empty. Do you understand that the box office flopped?
Rachel Zegler was cornered. The internet had already turned against her, and every word she had ever said about Snow White was being dissected, mocked, and thrown back in her face. But instead of staying silent, like so many actors do when a project goes up in flames, she made a choice. She was going to fight back. The video wasn't polished. There were no bright studio lights, no carefully curated background, just Zegler, sitting in what appeared to be her bedroom, looking directly into the camera. It was raw, personal, a desperate attempt to regain control of a narrative that had already spiraled far beyond her reach. Her face was tense, her eyes filled with a mix of frustration, exhaustion, and something else, something closer to desperation. She had seen the hate. She had read the comments. And now she was speaking directly to those who had spent months tearing her apart.
The impossible seemed possible.
With breathtaking ambition, they create magic that wraps its arms around our wildest imaginations.
Here are the nominees for Best Visual Effects.
At first, her tone was careful, almost pleading. I never wanted to come off as me being ungrateful for the opportunities I have, she said, her voice soft, deliberate. This was her olive branch, her attempt to remind people that, despite everything, she did appreciate the doors Hollywood had opened for her. She knew she had been given a role that countless others would have killed for. But even as she tried to sound gracious, there was an undercurrent of something else, an exhaustion that hinted at just how much the criticism had worn her down. But then, her tone shifted.
The actress's race and the crackhead dwarves have become the least of my concerns. So apparently, according to them and according to the writers of Snow White and Disney, women can't even want to be in love anymore. That was back in the 30s when women actually wanted to be around men, actually wanted to be in love.
Her eyes sharpened. The vulnerability that had flickered for just a moment was gone. What replaced it was defiance, a steely, almost bitter determination. She leaned in slightly, her voice taking on a sharper edge. I can also be having the greatest time, she continued, pausing just long enough to let the words sink in. Then, without warning, she dropped the bombshell. "So?" And simultaneously wishing people would stop sending me threats.
Where Rachel Zegler is not doing anything to silence all of those reports, rumors, and online chatter that she and Gal Gadot are beefing. Yes, beefing.
The air in the room seemed to change. It was the kind of statement designed to stop people in their tracks, a hard pivot from self-reflection to a chilling accusation. It wasn't just about unfair criticism anymore. This was about her life. And in that moment, she wasn't just defending herself as an actress, she was defending herself as a person. For a split second, the weight of her words seemed to hang there, unchallenged. No one could deny that online harassment could be brutal. No one could argue that threats, if she had truly received them, weren't horrifying. And yet, instead of rallying support, the internet's response was swift and merciless.
So what do you think the odds are of this person working ever again?
But how many people do you hear about actors you love? You love what? Look at Robert De Niro. I love basically every movie he's ever done. Every time that guy opens his mouth as a private citizen, I'm like, oh my God.
Skepticism flooded social media. People demanded proof. Where were the threats? Why hadn't she spoken about them earlier? Some accused her of exaggeration, using the claim as a shield to deflect valid criticism. Others pointed out the irony, how she had publicly dismissed classic Disney storytelling as weird and creepy, yet now wanted sympathy from the very fan base she had alienated.
He's gone on to talk about this film numerous times, how she once thought Snow White was creepy, she doesn't like the prince, she thinks she should get paid more because she has to wear that dress, she should get paid for streaming. I mean, talk about biting the hand that feeds you.
What should have been a moment of vulnerability, a plea for basic human decency, backfired spectacularly. Instead of silencing her critics, the internet turned her own words against her. Screenshots of her previous interviews resurfaced, showing her laughing off the original Snow White, calling it outdated, mocking the love story. Those clips were everywhere. And now, they weren't just seen as a fresh, progressive take on an old fairy tale. They were seen as evidence, proof that she had disrespected a legacy, only to turn around and ask for kindness when things got tough. And then, the memes started. ruthless, unforgiving? TikTok was flooded with reaction videos, splicing her emotional plea with sarcastic responses.
I feel like this Snow White controversy is single-handedly like rolling back feminism. Like all these women are watching Rachel Zegler on their social media. They're hating her because she's absolutely destroying this role.
I never want to be ungrateful. One user mimicked before cutting to her previous interviews where she laughed at the original film. On X, formerly Twitter, hashtags like #snowflop and #notmysnowwhite surged in popularity. What should have been a moment of control had spiraled into a complete PR disaster. But Rachel didn't stop there. What happened next only made things worse. Rachel Zegler thought this was her chance to change the narrative, a moment of redemption, a chance to take back control. But within minutes, it became clear. She had made a fatal miscalculation. The internet's response was immediate and merciless.
Like the culture is trying to push wokeness. Wokeness is not a deep archetype. It's using the idea of victimhood and vulnerability as a new religion.
Within minutes of her video going live, TikTok exploded. Reaction videos flooded the platform, each one dissecting her words with laser precision. Some creators played her clips side by side with her past interviews, exposing contradictions in real time. One particularly viral video showed her saying, "I never want to come off as ungrateful," only to cut straight to a previous interview where she mocked the original Snow White as outdated and creepy. The contrast was devastating. On X, formerly Twitter, the backlash was even worse. The platform erupted into chaos, with the hashtags #snowflop, #notmysnowwhite, and #RachelZeglerIsOverParty trending within hours. Thousands of tweets flooded in, many pointing out that Zegler had dug her own grave by alienating Disney's core audience months earlier. Screenshots of her controversial statements resurfaced, reminding everyone why they had turned against her in the first place.
Something is going on behind the scenes with almost every major animation, video game, and movie studio that they're doing this intentionally or something. I don't f***ing know. I'm not even gonna talk about this. People are like, oh wow, Snow White flopped. Who is surprised? You cast arguably the least genuine, most out of touch, and disliked person in her industry, and her industry is Hollywood.
Then came the memes, brutal, unrelenting, everywhere. People clipped moments from her video, layering them with sarcastic captions. One of the most viral posts showed her tearfully defending herself, immediately followed by the iconic Snow White scene where the evil queen cackles. "Fool! Such a foolish little girl." Another replaced her Louvre analogy with a fake quote. "When the Mona Lisa was painted, people still lined up to see her, and I can only hope." The internet wasn't just rejecting her message, it was mocking it to the point of humiliation. Even mainstream media picked up on the disaster. Entertainment news sites and YouTube commentators jumped on the story, ripping her video apart. Some headlines questioned whether she had just sealed her own fate. Others pointed out that rather than taking responsibility for her words, she had played the victim, turning a PR crisis into a full-blown catastrophe.
And the Disney movie, remember she was out like a couple years ago being like, there's certainly not gonna be a prince rescuing me, I can tell you that. And then even Disney got on its heels and they're like, we're gonna reshoot the movie immediately. Like we're gonna make some changes.
And it didn't stop there. Fans started pulling real receipts, clips from Hollywood interviews, red carpet moments, even past social media posts, painting a picture of an actress who, in their eyes, had gone from rising star to unlikable diva in record time. People began comparing her to other actresses who had handled controversy far better, like Anya Taylor-Joy or Jenna Ortega, pointing out how they had navigated difficult roles with grace and humility instead of doubling down. The contrast was devastating. And then, the worst possible thing happened. Theaters started pulling Snow White from their schedules. The box office numbers were coming in, and they were catastrophic. This wasn't just online backlash anymore, it was hitting Disney's pockets. Rachel Zegler had hoped to control the narrative. Instead, she had handed her critics exactly what they wanted, proof that she wasn't ready for the weight of a Disney princess crown. But what happened next?
In the animated movie, she shows up to the dwarves' house. What does she do? She cleans the house, which is a mess, and she prepares a meal. But in the new movie, you can't have the lady cooking and cleaning. So what does she do in the new movie? She just takes a nap. That's the ideal of the modern woman.
Even worse. Then came the numbers. Cold, hard facts. The kind no PR team could spin, no teary-eyed apology could fix. Numbers don't lie. And these numbers spelled disaster. Disney had poured $250 million into Snow White. That wasn't just a big-budget film. It was one of the most expensive live-action remakes in Disney history. The studio had banked everything on this movie, expecting it to follow in the footsteps of Beauty and the Beast, The Lion King, or even Aladdin. But when the opening weekend numbers dropped, it was devastating. A catastrophic $43 million. Not just disappointing, humiliating. For comparison, even The Little Mermaid, which had faced its own wave of controversy, had opened with nearly $95 million domestically. Even Haunted Mansion.
Even the most girl-bossy, feminist girls out there that I know, they still come home, they cuddle up on the couch, and you know what they watch? Rom-coms.
A film with zero buzz, had pulled in $24 million, and that was considered a flop. But Snow White, it wasn't just underperforming. It was sinking like a stone. Theaters across the country scrambled to respond. Screens that were once reserved for Snow White were quietly reassigned to other films. IMAX and premium theaters pulled the movie entirely, replacing it with anything that could draw an audience. By the second weekend, major chains were cutting showtimes, moving Snow White to smaller screens, and in some cities, removing it altogether. And it wasn't just lack of interest, it was active avoidance. Audiences weren't just skipping Snow White, they were going out of their way to avoid it. On social media, users bragged about choosing other movies instead. Some even bought tickets to rival films just to keep Snow White from making money. The film had become radioactive.
They went woke.
Yeah.
She went out and said stuff woke that was going to hurt the film. They couldn't come out and go against her because then you're going after somebody for saying what you say you believe.
Even Disney's streaming strategy was in chaos. Originally planned for an exclusive theatrical run, rumors began to swirl that the studio was considering an early Disney Plus release, a desperation move typically reserved for outright box office disasters. And the backlash? It wasn't just loud. Merchandise sales flatlined. Toy shelves sat fully stocked, untouched. The promotional tie-ins, fast food deals, clothing lines, collectible dolls, scrapped on arrival. Disney executives were reportedly panicked. Investors were furious. Snow White wasn't just losing money, it was becoming a symbol of everything wrong with modern Hollywood. And at the center of it all, Rachel Zegler. But her worst moment? It was still coming. Rachel Zegler's attempt to reclaim her narrative had backfired spectacularly. What was meant to be a heartfelt metaphor, comparing herself to the winged victory of Samothrace, a revered 2,000-year-old Greek sculpture displayed in the Louvre, was instantly ripped apart by the internet. People weren't hearing the emotional plea of an actress struggling to navigate fame. They weren't seeing an artist reaching for a deeper, poetic comparison. They saw arrogance, delusion, a Hollywood starlet placing herself on the same level as an ancient masterpiece. Within minutes, the internet went to work. Social media feeds were flooded with side-by-side images of Zegler and the famous statue. Some edits were subtle, just a split screen of her interview and the sculpture. Others were merciless, photoshopping her face onto the ancient relic, dubbing her Rachel of Samothrace, or worse, mocking her as a broken masterpiece in need of repair. The memes practically wrote themselves. Comment sections exploded. Snarky responses poured in, each one more brutal than the last. Rachel, you're not a Greek artifact. You're in a Disney remake. Another read, people wait in line to see Winged Victory. Nobody's lining up for Snow White. The Louvre itself even became part of the joke, with users tagging the museum's official account asking if Zegler's statue would be on display soon. Then came the deep dives. People analyzed the Winged Victory comparison with surgical precision, picking apart just how ridiculous it sounded. Historians and art enthusiasts jumped in, explaining the true significance of the sculpture, how it represented victory, resilience, and artistic mastery. One viral post sarcastically asked, "What battle did Rachel Zegler win? The war against bad PR." Others pointed out that while Winged Victory was celebrated for its imperfections, Snow White was being torn apart for its flaws. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Even mainstream media outlets couldn't ignore the disaster. Articles emerged with headlines like Rachel Zegler compares herself to Greek masterpiece. Internet reacts and from Disney princess to Louvre-worthy legend. Late-night talk shows and YouTube commentators jumped on the controversy, delivering merciless punchlines. One host quipped, "If Rachel Zegler is the Winged Victory of Samothrace, then I guess my grandma's broken garden gnome belongs in the MoMA." Zegler's words weren't just being criticized. They were being immortalized as one of the biggest PR missteps in recent Hollywood history. And the worst part? This wasn't just another internet joke that would disappear in a few days. This was sticking. The winged victory comparison had solidified Zegler's reputation in a way no viral clip ever had before. It had become her legacy, and no amount of damage control could erase it. And yet, Rachel Zegler refused to back down. Most actors, when faced with a PR disaster of this magnitude, would take the obvious route. Go silent, lay low, let the storm pass. But not Zegler. She doubled down. Instead of retreating from the spotlight, she leaned into it, insisting that people still show up for her work. She spoke with confidence, almost as if willing the backlash to disappear through sheer determination. But the internet wasn't buying it. With every statement she made, every new attempt to justify herself, the backlash only intensified. Her insistence that audiences still supported her came off as delusional in the face of Snow White's plummeting numbers. Online critics dissected her every word, pulling up clips from past interviews, contrasting them with her newer ones, exposing contradictions in real time. It wasn't just that people disagreed with her, it was that they enjoyed proving her wrong. TikTok and X, formerly Twitter, turned her own words into ammunition. One viral post spliced together footage of Zegler claiming she had support, followed by clips of empty theaters, abandoned Snow White merchandise, and articles detailing the film's catastrophic box office. Another showed her defiantly stating she still had an audience, immediately cutting to a sarcastic Google search. Where? The message was clear. Hollywood could prop her up all they wanted, but the public had already made up their minds, and the more she fought back, the worse it got. Every attempt at damage control felt forced, every statement hollow. Some critics pointed out that while Zegler demanded empathy for herself, she had mocked and dismissed the original Snow White without a second thought. The double standard was glaring. If she had truly respected the legacy of the film, would she have laughed off the classic romance as weird and creepy? Would she have rolled her eyes at the original princess instead of acknowledging its impact? And in Hollywood, one mistake can cost everything. Studios pay attention to public sentiment. A-list careers aren't built on talent alone. They rely on audience goodwill. And once that goodwill is gone, it's nearly impossible to get back. With Snow White becoming one of Disney's biggest flops, industry insiders began to whisper about what this meant for Zegler's future. Was she still a bankable star? Would studios risk casting her in another major role? Because in an industry where money talks, the numbers were sending a brutal message. The audience had spoken, and they weren't showing up.